Hello, this is Sophie Lawson from sophielawson.com, and this is episode 155 of the Sophie Art Podcast, which is a little podcast that I do about the art and things. And this one is about the art. We're looking at part 2 of an article from the book Creating Stylized Characters by 3D Total Publishing. And this one is the article called Gesture and Pose with the artist Ida Hem. Last week I was actually calling this artist Ida Hem. I don't know why, but sometimes when I see the letter I say E instead of I. So I was calling her Ida Hem. So I apologise for that. But she's actually called Ida Hem. I'll talk a bit more about her in a minute. But this is part 2. Last week we looked at, well, the article is called Gesture and Pose. And last week we looked at parts 1 and 2, which covered what is gesture, squashing and stretching, and building up from a gesture. And I feel like last week was more sort of about what you should be doing. Last week's was more sort of like what is gesture, getting into it. What we're doing this week, we're looking at parts 3 and 4, capturing gestures and exploring personality in gesture. Well, this one's brilliant. What we're doing now is we're getting more into how to actually do it, how to use reference, and how to turn references into gestures and poses, and how to draw gestures and poses from your imagination. This is a really fun one, so I hope you're going to enjoy this. lilDENNiS, little co-host with us, and he's going to get us straight into this one because he's excited. He is. Boing. He gets us right into it. Little Kitty, if you're watching on YouTube at youtube.com/Sophie Lawson, you can see these two little, well, what they're little puppets, but little cat, little kitty, and little dog. They're little friends that kissing. They're in their little house now, safe and sound. I think Kitty's died. I think. Now lilDENNiS is going to be humping her by the looks of it. Because that's what they do in that house. They get out to stuff. Let's get into this one now. Can you hear my squeaky chair? It's quite weird, isn't it? I like that. Sometimes it sounds like a fart. I find it quite fun. But let's get into this one. So we're looking in the art book called Creating Stylized Characters by 3D Total Publishing. Before we get into it, what they've done is, when they created this book, the word stylized is spelled Styllizer. And, well, for me, stylized should be with an S. So I thought to myself, I know it's because in America they use Zs or Zs, what they call them Zs, don't they? But in England we use S's. So I thought to myself, why is it that America uses Zs instead of S's? I think it actually looks a bit cooler with Zs, but I like S's because it's like what I'm used to, you know. But this one we're looking at an article. It's called Gesture and Pose by the artist Ida Hem. Like I said, I was pronouncing her name wrong last week, but you can find her little website at idahem.com. It's a really cool little website, and also she is on Instagram at Ida something Hem. We've lost the thingy majig here. Yeah, so if you're watching on YouTube, you can see her thing, but she's got such cool artwork. Like I said last week, it reminds me of like 80s and 90s cartoons. That's what it reminds me of. Really cool characters. Very cool characters. And as I said last week, I think it's cool if you're studying from somebody who's got artwork you like, because it means you're going to be bringing in a bit of their style, hopefully, into your own stuff. So last week we looked at what is gesture, stretching and squashing, and building up from a gesture. So I'll put links and everything in the show notes at sophielawson.com. But lilDENNiS has joined us as well. Look. So lilDENNiS is with us, sitting on the little desk. I think he's missing out. He thinks he's missing out, I think, when he's in his little house. So this one is brilliant. this one's going to be a little bit different than last week. Last week I was sort of going through my notes quite a lot. This one I'm going to do a lot more reading of the actual article, because what I found was this one is a lot more there's a lot of information in the little bits that she's wrote in this article. So I really wanted to talk about the things. But so the main takeaways I got from this one is reference versus imagination with your gestures, and that's with theory and examples. So we see examples of how to use reference and how to use imagination to create these gestures. We also look into things you should be asking and looking out for when you're creating gestures. I love that. It's like questions you should be asking yourself. The balance between rules and imagination. Exaggeration, that word again. Observing characters' weight. I feel like that's a big one. I feel like that is a really important one when creating gestures, is the angles and the weight of the character. So I noticed that a lot coming up in this bit was she kept mentioning the weight. So you've got to be mindful of the weight. They've also got the balance. Yeah, balance. The word balance as well kept coming up. Balance between lots of things. Balance between the character's pose, like the weight of the character, shifting the weight around, but also the balance between like shapes and stuff. Visual flow, how less is more. Asking yourself questions as you're bringing characters to life. I love that. It's almost like you're having a conversation with yourself, but you're not really. What we find out towards the end of this article is we're actually talking to the character. It's like the character is responding to our questions. I love it, I do. She almost like, well, we'll get into it in a minute. And then also we've got the balance of technical and feeling. And then I've put 3 words, story, story, story. That was the main thing that popped out on this bit, was story, really. Gestures are all about story. And there is so much story in these characters. It's a brilliant one, this. So, well, we're going to start with capturing gestures. So what have I put? In my little notes I said read the little intro. So what we've got in this bit is we've got, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We've got 6 poses, and what she's done is she's drawn a pose from, I think there's 3 of them from reference, 3 of them from her imagination. And then what she's done is she's just drawn it, but then she's done another one where she's done a pose of it, exaggerating features. It's brilliant. So but the thing that she said at the start was, listen to this, look. Now that you know what a gesture is and how to use one to create a character design, how do you use reference and your imagination to create a character? It's brilliant. Creating art is an extremely personal process, and every artist has their own unique way of approaching it. This process will differ from many artists, so while you read this section, know that it is good to develop your own way of capturing gestures to suit your artistic needs. I love that, because like a lot of the other articles, they say, this is how I do it, but you might not resonate with it. This is what I love. Every single artist has like a different way of approaching creating characters, and even though we're all sort of using the same things, we're doing it in different ways. So I love that, because what she's basically saying is experiment. Don't take my word for it either. do it for yourself, sort of thing. So I put in my notes, I said be open to try different approaches. And then she also said it's preferable to draw gestures from reference because it will create better results, and there's lots. And she said there's much more to learn from it because you're learning how to observe, which is something you said here. So last week I said about how as you're going through this book, key words are highlighted in a different colour. So the word actually pops out of the article. So some of the words that have been highlighted in this is observation, interpretation, imagination, and then you get observation again, fundamentals. So what's good about this is if you're going through this book and you, for instance, wanted to study observation, you can look for that word and it will pop out at you. So you can read that little bit. So she says here, While drawing from reference, there are two important aspects to keep in mind: observation and interpretation. So in this video of the article, she's talking about how to draw gestures and poses from reference images and what you should be looking out for. And then she's also doing it with the imagination as well. So I love it, I do. And then she also gives us examples. So we see how to draw poses from a reference image. So how to turn a reference image into a gesture, but also how to turn your imagination into a gesture as well. So it's brilliant. And we got what we get little drawings, and we also get a little bit of writing where she's explaining what's happening. So we'll go through that in a minute. But also in here I've put ask questions. So she keeps in this bit here. She's giving you example questions you should be asking, or that you could ask. So for instance, when you're drawing from reference, you want to ask yourself, what is the pose telling us? How can I expand upon it? I love that, because what she does is, when she goes through her little examples in a minute, she'll look at the reference, which is a character, for instance, sitting down on a chair. She'll draw it, just observing it, and then she'll ask herself, how can I expand upon it? So, for instance, she might look at it and think, you might have a character sitting down with his legs crossed or something, and then she might think, I can make that a lot more exciting by really over-exaggerating the leg so it's more crossed. So then when she comes to do her one, she'll push the leg to make it more exciting. So what she's doing is she's sort of showing you how you can use reference but bring your own sort of interpretation into it. Yeah, that's the word she uses, observation and interpretation. So what I love about this is you're using reference, but you're also being creative. You're sort of bringing yourself into it. I thought it was cool. So here we've got gestures are all about emotion and storytelling. I like that. And she says, oh look, this is it. She says, you don't have to draw exactly what you see. And then what I put was, so that's where she's saying you're using the reference to sort of as a reference. And then I thought to myself, I made this up. I thought it's quite cool. When we got reference images, they're reference, not replica. So what you got to remember is you're not replicating it. You're using it as a reference, so you want to interpret. I thought it was quite cool. And she's put here, exaggerate to highlight the important parts, like hips on a sexy pose. So I started thinking about this. So one of these characters, for instance, we've got a girl sitting on a chair, and when she's talking about drawing the pose, she says about how she noticed or she observed that the character's hips were very pushed to one side. She was talking about the weight of the character. So when she comes to do her little pose where she's exaggerating it, she really pushes the hips, really emphasises the hips, which creates a much more sexy pose. But I thought to myself, this is why, because last week I talked about how if you're acting out the poses, you actually feel the pose. So when you feel the pose, that feeling comes into it as you're drawing. So for instance, you've got a character here who's sitting on a chair with her bum that's slightly pushed to one side. But if you actually acted out that pose, you would feel the weight of your hip. You would feel the tension of your hips being pushed. So then when you come to draw it, you would remember that and you'd be like, right, when I was doing that pose, I could feel, you can basically feel what your body's doing. So when you feel what your body's doing, it makes it easier to draw it because you can start capturing what you're feeling. So that's why I thought to myself, I feel like maybe, if you were struggling with the pose, I feel like the best thing to do is act it out. I feel like that's quite a powerful thing to do, to act it out. I like that. And then I put here, it goes back into the feeling. So then what I've put here is, I love this. So when she says, when observing, ask, where are they leaning their weight? So when you're observing a character or a reference and you're drawing it, you want to ask, where are they leaning their weight? Where is the line of action? How are the shoulders placed in relation to the hips? So what she's doing is she's telling you sort of things to be looking out for. So if you know to be mindful of the weight, where the character's weight is, you're actually going to look for it. So when you start doing your poses, you can start sort of playing into that and start pushing those areas and stuff. I'll put here a beautiful quote, single entity on the second paragraph. Let's have a look and see if I can find it. Oh look, here we go. So she's talking here about observation and interpreting reference images. So she says, the important part is not just to draw what you see, but to capture the entire subject as one single entity, which goes into the line of action that we talked about last week. Yeah, that's cool. So I really like this because it's like you're looking at the character, but you're actually turning it into sort of shapes. It's quite weird. I like it, I do. And then she starts moving into the imagination bit. So she said, I'll put here, balance between imagination and rules. Reference equals rules. Stops you going into the extremes. Oh yeah, because she started talking about imagination, how it's fun to draw from your imagination, but she was talking about how when you're drawing from reference, she said something really good here, look. Drawing from your imagination is completely different. It may be more fun and maybe better fuel for your creativity, but it is extremely important to always bounce back to reference to make sure you're improving without leaving behind the foundations. So I like that. There's this balancing act going on here between having fun and drawing from your imagination, but also making sure you're sticking to the rules. So this is basically what she's talking about the whole time, is looking at the reference, but also sort of playing with it, pushing it, but you're pushing it without breaking it. That's the thing. So you're pushing the hips right to the limit of what they could do. So it makes it more exciting, but it keeps it believable. It's quite cool. So I've got a little quote here. She says, drawing from imagination, this is what I just said. Drawing from imagination comes with a whole different set of challenges. Instead of observation and interpreting, you are creating. But then she says the same concepts apply to gestures. This bit here, look, a good gesture should have a clear story / action, accurate line weight, and then a line of action to follow. So what I liked about this was, if you get the weight of the character, this is how you start seeing how everything's all interconnected. The weight of the character, so where the hips are, if those hips are really pushed to one side, that's going to change the line of action, because the line of action is going to have to flow through the hips. So it's amazing, really, how all the things are linked together. So then what we get is 6 different poses. We're going to get examples of stylized gestures captured from everyday, less stylized poses. So what she's doing is she's taking sort of what could be considered just everyday boring poses, and she turns them into stylized, exciting poses. And she does 3 of them from reference images and 3 of them from the imagination, which is brilliant. So what was I put here? She's turning potentially boring poses into exciting ones. And again, like last week, I feel like this is a really fun way to learn, because what you're doing is she's telling you sort of things to be looking out for with text, but then she's giving you visuals to look at, and then she's explaining what you're looking at. This article is was a beautifully put together article, it is. So the first pose we've got, I called this one the I'm a zombie pose. So basically what it is it's a bloke sitting on a chair looking at his phone. So he's basically turned into a zombie. He's like zoned in on his phone. So the first one, the first bit we get, she says, this is a quick sketch based on a reference. So she's doing an observational sketch. And then what she's doing is, she says, this is a simplified gesture. So what she's doing is, she first looks at the reference and draws it, like a little sketch. And then what she's doing is she's bringing her imagination in. So she's using that reference and she's turning it into a stylized gesture. And she tells you sort of the things that she's pushing and pulling and all the things she's playing with. So the first one, she's observed he's straight back. So what we've got is a character sitting on a chair looking at his phone, and she's noticed he's got a very straight back. So then when she comes to do her little gesture, she overemphasises his straight back, but she balances it and plays it off against his curved arms. So what she does is she keeps the straightness of his back, but she overemphasises and overcurves his legs. Because then what we get is we get this balance between straight and curvy. So she's still being true to the reference, but she's just sort of changing it slightly. So everything gets a bit more curvy, which is cool. And you notice it's really little things, simple little things. And then she said this makes him more curvy for balance. And then I love this as well. He's basically sitting on a chair. In the sketch, you can sort of see the chair, and it looks quite detailed and stuff. In the little gesture, she even simplifies the chair and turns it into these lines which sort of play into the flow of the character. It's amazing, isn't it? So what she's doing is, it's not just the character that she's sort of... well, this is what I said last week. Everything's got a gesture. Even the chair has got a gesture. So she's basically turning that chair into a stylized gesture, really. Even though she's keeping the chair there, she's playing with the chair as well. And then up here, she's looking at the hole. So because I feel like, well, if I had done this, I don't know whether I would have done that with a chair. I'm not sure. But that just shows what she's doing. She's sort of mindful of everything. She can see how everything's playing off against each other. I like that. But the other thing is, by putting that chair in there, she's creating a negative shape. She's creating a negative shape between the chair and the bloke's back. So this is the thing. This is how you start noticing, like, it's amazing, it is. Everything sort of comes together. But the next one, we've got a character holding a bunch of flowers. And I called this one the waiting patiently pose. It looks like a lady. I was quite intrigued by this one, because I thought to myself, it looked a little bit... I wondered whether she was like grieving for somebody, her husband who had died or something. And then you wondered whether she was standing at a wedding or something. So I was fascinated by this one. But the first one, this is what she's observed. She's observed it as a straight, static pose. But she says, senses she is waiting for something. So I like that, because in her observation, she's not just observing the things she's looking at. She's not just observing the lines and the shapes and the weight of the character. She's also observing the story that's coming out of the reference image. How cool is that? Because if she's observing that, she can now take that story into a stylized one, which I think is brilliant. So in the stylized one, this is cool. She's basically kept it the same, but she's slightly twisted the head. So what we've got is we've got a character who's just basically standing, we're looking at her side on really, and she's holding some flowers, so she's looking to the left. When she turns it into a gesture, a stylized gesture, she sort of twists the character a bit more. So we're looking more at like a 3/4 angle. And what she does is, the only thing she does really is separates the legs. So what that does is it creates a little shape between the legs, which is quite cool. We now get the weight of the character, and also we get this little we get this line of action. It's much more exciting, even though it's the same. It's brilliant. I put here, look, in my notes I said, same pose but feels totally different just by twisting the hips. It's brilliant how little things like that are quite powerful. This next pose, I love this one. I think this might be... this is another one using reference. This is the final one. What we've got is we've got a lady sitting on like an armchair. she's got a piece of paper or a photograph or something in her hand, big smiling face on her, and she's got like her knees, one of her knees is underneath her other leg. No, one of her legs is underneath her knee. So she's sort of like sitting on her foot. It's quite cool. So this one I called it the love letter pose, because for me, I got the impression she was reading a love letter or something, because she had like a nice happy little face. So this is what Ida observed. She observed the weight on the left side. So when she did a little sketch, she observed the weight on the left side, and she said observe the weight on the left side while the spine curves in the opposite direction. So she's basically, what she's done there is she sort of noticed the pinching and pulling, but also that's given her the line of action for when she comes to do her stylized pose. So in her stylized pose, she exaggerates the curve to make more weight, to make the weight more evident. So exaggerates the curve of the hips to make the weight more evident. So she's basically pushing the character much more over to the left, focuses on I like this. She says she focused on what she found most interesting. That reminds me of something. It's that thing of like, draw what you love. It's like if you're doing a still life, sometimes they say when you're doing a still life, get like some cups and the saucepans and stuff, put them on your desk. But I've always thought to myself, if you're not into saucepans, if you haven't got any excitement for what you're drawing, that excitement is gonna show. So basically, I've always said, draw things that you love. So if you're doing still lifes, I would say pick up things that you're finding exciting. Maybe even pick up pens and that. But I love that. It's like what she's doing is she's drawing what she's focusing on the areas of the character that she found most interesting. So then what that made me think was, you could have like 100 people look at this reference image of this lady sitting on a chair, and we would each do our stylized gesture completely differently. Because Ida is looking at the hips and she likes that, but for instance somebody else might look at it and love this character's hair, and they might emphasise the hair and make it overexcited. Or somebody might look at the letters and like the way the character's fingers are touching the letter, so they might sort of focus in on that. Or somebody else might focus on the foot, or even the chair. Somebody else might like the chair. So I thought to myself, it's amazing this. Like, you could have a million people do this pose and we're all going to come up with something completely different. Which I like that, I thought it was cool. And also I'll put here, look, so even though we're using reference, we're still being creative. It's cool, isn't it? So the next ones, we've got 3 more little poses for this section of the article. So now we get 3 poses that Ida has drawn from her imagination. The first one, we've got a character, like a little lady holding like a load of books. She looks sort of like a student or something, and she's got her arm on her head, as if you know when you're doing that thing, you're looking into the distance. She's doing that. So for this one, I called this pose the ship has sailed pose. So this one's done with imagination. There's no reference being used here. And in the first one, when she'd done a little sketch, so a little sketch from her imagination, she says, this is what she said: props create weight. So I like this. The props, which are the books that the character's holding, is actually creating weight for the character. So those books are pulling the character's arm down. So that's actually shifting into the pose. So I love this as well. It's almost like it's not just the character, it's not just the body that is creating the pose, it's accessories as well. And also, if we went back to the one with the chair is also influencing the pose. So again, you see how everything is interconnected with each other. I love that a lot. And then she's talking about the angles and the weight. She said the most notable parts are the sharp angle of her raised arm and the sense of weight created by the book hanging down in her hand. So I thought that was quite interesting. And then I've also put negative shape between the arm. So you've that arm that's up on, when she's got her arm up on her head, you've got like a triangle. You've got a nice little negative shape there between the thing. But what I love about this is, in the little sketch, that negative shape is quite intricate. You've got like, it's got a sleeve in it, but it's got like lots of little jaggies for a sleeve. When she does a stylized pose, it's just straight lines. This is something else she talks about in a minute, is basically getting rid of details. It's like less is more. So in the thing when she does her little stylized pose, what she does is she straightens the legs, which I thought was quite interesting, because in all the other ones she's always been adding more bends. So at the start she was saying about straight is boring, well in this instance straight is actually more exciting, because what that straight does is the straight balances off with the curve. Because what she does is as well, she pushes the character's bum out a bit more to create more of a curve. So now we end up with a curve and a straight, which is something I noticed. I put that in my takeaways. It's the balance between straights and curves. We've got lots of balancing acts going on here. You've got balancing of shapes, balancing of the weight of the character, balancing of lines, like straights and curves, balancing of accessories. It's brilliant. And then also, I put here, look, all about balancing. So I put balancing pose, shapes, straights and curves, and weight. Brilliant. The next pose, I like this one. It's like a fat, happy chappy. I got the impression he was going off to work, but I called this one the do-do-do pose. It's like he's sort of swinging. He's got a little briefcase, and I can imagine him sort of walking along, swinging that briefcase from side to side, like a happy chappy. So he's a big fat guy, lots of round shapes going on. So this one is another one from her imagination, and in the imagination, in a little drawing that she drew from a little sketch from imagination, this is what she mentioned. She said, there's a sense of action / motion which creates a story. So she's done that. What she's done is, one of his feet is going backwards, the other one's coming up, as if he's in the middle of walking. So you get that impression of motion, which she says is creating a story, action. And then also subtle line of action. She said there is a line of action going on here, it's very subtle. So then when she does simplifies the gesture, she overemphasises that line of action. Oh, I love this as well. So when she does a simplified gesture, she says less lines. I love that. Less is more. What she does is, basically, she's removing lots of detail. So in her little sketch, for instance, his jacket, his sleeve, for instance, has got lots of little wrinkles, and also it's like you see two parts to his arm in his sleeve. When she does a stylized gesture, it's only one line. So everything's just getting simplified, and even his hand, instead of his hand being like a separate shape, his hand sort of flows effortlessly into his arm. So what that does is it just creates a much more nicer flow to the character, which goes in with the motion. You get the impression he's swinging his legs. Quite cool. And even his feet are now, they're sort of more curvy. It's brilliant. So she says, pushes a line of action to make it more active. So she's overemphasising the action of it. Creates a straight line, a straight curve to raised leg. Yeah, she basically, his leg before, when she did a little drawing, his leg was like straight. Now it's actually become a curve, much more curvy. And then she said the word visual flow. I love that. She mentioned that phrase a few times, visual flow. So then the last one we've got is another one from her imagination. What we've got is a female character, quite a sexy one. And what she's doing is, she's sort of like, for me it looks like she's in the middle of dancing, or as if she's about to start dancing. So I called this one the Shall We Dance pose. Quite cool. So in her little sketch from imagination, this is what she said. She emphasised the word feminine. So she's thinking feminine. What I love about this is, if she's thinking feminine, as she's drawing it, she's thinking that. So little things like the character's hand, for instance, we get that little sexy little, you know when characters have their hand out, like little dainty things. We get that. We also get high heels, and everything's just more sort of sexy, I suppose. She also mentions that word again, the Contrapposto, which is an Italian word. We talked about that last week. It's all to do with the balancing, the pinching and pulling, the weight of the character. So she talks about that again, which I like that, because it shows you what she's thinking as she's creating a character. She's mindful of the pinching and pulling. She also mentioned the S-curve. I love this. So she said the S-curve works well for posing elegant female characters. And I thought to myself, the reason for that is the S-curve, so the line of action is an S, it looks like an S. What that does is it sort of pushes everything into curves. So you end up with curvy hips and legs, and you also end up with curvy torsos. And then you also end up with like twisting going on. So everything just starts getting pushed in like a sexy way. And then I thought to myself, that S-curve, which is the line of action, it dictates the shapes that follow, which is what she talked about last week. She talked about that last week, how the line of action sort of flows through the entire process of creating your character. So if your character's got like an S-curve, all the shapes that come later, the structure, it's all going to be like flowing through that S-curve. It's quite cool, I thought. And that was basically it. And then, so the last thing I put here, she says, what is it? Gesture. A lot of detail is not always needed or indeed effective. Less is more. So again, if we look at if you saw a little sketch that she did, the character's hip, for instance, it's almost like, well, firstly, the little dress, she's wearing this little floaty dress, and she's holding one side of the dress up with her hand. So in the little sketch, the dress is like in 1-2 parts. So you've got like it's almost like two separate curves to the dress. When she does her stylized, those two lines becomes one, but that happens everywhere. So you've got like two lines on each side of the skirt, but that actually becomes one line. But then you've also got another line for the waist. So if you counted the lines on one side of this character, it would be 1, 2, 3, 4. It sort of looks like 4 sort of zigzags. But in the stylized one, it's actually just one flowing line. It's one flowing line. So that's where you can sort of see how the line of action is not just flowing through the character, it's flowing through the clothing as well. It's quite amazing. But I love it how what I love about this bit of the article, this section, the capturing gestures, she's drawing from reference and drawing from imagination. But you can, when she turns her little sketches into stylized poses or gestures, what I love is it looks like the original drawing, but it also looks a lot more, it looks different. It's weird, it's the same but different. It's brilliant. But what I love is you can really look at these two little drawings and notice for yourself. You can notice what she's doing. So you can see what she's simplifying. So when you come to do it yourself, you sort of know. You sort of start realising what you can do. It's brilliant. This bit here, we're into the last section of this article now, called Exploring Personality and Gesture. So for this one, I'm actually going to read quite a lot of the article because I think it's brilliant. But what we've got what she does is she's created a little character, and we get 7 poses of this character. So we've got 7 poses of the same character, with the point of the pose is to bring across the story of the character. So we get 7 little poses. Some of them is capturing the essence of the character, some of them aren't. But what we realise is all of these poses are beautiful, but just because it's beautiful pose doesn't mean it's actually going to be right for the character. So this is where we start getting to that thing of the pose and the gesture having a story. So if the character is a shy character and we have this pose of like confidence, it might be an amazing pose, but you've got to ask yourself, does this pose fit with my character? Which goes into something they talk about in the other articles. Before you even start drawing, you want to write down about your character so that you've got the story of the character before you start drawing. And then you start knowing what it looks like to me is she creates a story of a character, and then she pulls words out. So she might put out the word insecure, if that's one of the character's like traits, and then she'll take that word and she'll start doing little poses, little gesture drawings of that word insecure, and then she'll look at all these poses and she'll say, does that pose look like insecure? If it does, she'll keep it. If it doesn't, she'll discard it. So this bit here, this is what I put in my notes. I said, gestures are good for, brainstorming sessions. Yeah, gestures are good for brainstorming sessions because they're quick, less detailed. So it's good for exploring character development ideas. It's almost like, you know that thing where you draw like you draw a circle with a word in the middle, like for instance spider, and then you have, it's a spider chart, isn't it? You have like all these lines coming off the centre. So you have a word spider and it will say like 8 legs. Another word will say like furry. Another word will say spider web or something. And that builds up like a picture of the spider. It's almost like that with these things here. This is what gesture's like. It's like gesture is like, it's the equivalent of drawing a spider graph. Spider chart. Good for exploring character development ideas. I put here in my notes, I said, read posing your character. I love this. The character is revealing themselves to you. So where we put this? This is what she wrote in the article. I absolutely love this. She says, posing your character and drawing their expressions is one of the most important parts of getting to know their personality. While sketching them for the first time, the character should be the one to reveal themselves and their personality and temperament emerging from their backstory and manifesting organically in their poses. How amazing is that? While sketching them for the first time, the character should be the one to reveal themselves to you. I love that. It goes into something I talked about before. When I was doing some painting, it was abstract painting. I was doing some abstract painting. It was almost, I got this impression that the paint was working with me. So I'd put paint on the canvas, I'd start painting, I had an idea in mind, but it was like the paint had its own idea. So what would happen is, you could fight it and say, no, I want it to be like this. But the best thing to do is to let the paint do what it wants, because the paint sort of knows better than you sometimes. So you end up with this thing where the paint and you are working together. It sounds like it's the same thing going on here. The character is working with you. So you might have an idea for a pose, but the character might actually want a different pose. So you've got to let the character pose itself as much as you. I thought it was brilliant. And then she also said, in that little bit there, she said about that it should be, what is it? Yeah, she said, and their temperament emerging from their backstory. So she highlighted the word backstory, which made me think about the thing they say in the other articles about writing. It all starts with writing. Character design all starts with writing. The backstory, you should know the backstory of the character before you even start drawing. The thing is though, saying that, Pernille Oram, who I'd looked at some articles last month, she actually didn't start with writing, she jumped straight into it. So again, like what Ida said at the start of this little thing here, she says this is how she does it, but it's not necessarily the way you should do it. It just shows you that, like she's saying here, it should emerge from their backstory, but you might actually enjoy drawing characters without any idea of what they're going to be doing. So I like that because it sort of shows you that there's no rules really. There are rules, but there's not rules at the same time. It's quite cool. Oh, I like this as well. So she says you want to be asking yourself what feels right. You want to, as you're gesturing, you want to be asking yourself what feels right. So do your little gesture and then ask yourself, does this feel right? But you're asking, does it feel right in relation to the character? So in other words, does this pose, I've got hiccups again, does this pose and does this gesture feel right for the character? Not does it look right, but does it feel right? And I've also put happy little accidents. It made me think of that. The way the character's sort of working with you. It's like little happy little accidents. Oh, and I've also put one's never enough. Yeah, lots of poses equals more understanding of their personality. So earlier she said about these are good for brainstorming because they're very quick. They only take 30 seconds, even not even that. You can get little poses, little gestures down. So what is it? Lots of poses. Yeah, understanding their personality. It goes into that thing about thumbnails as well. When you're doing thumbnails, they say you don't want to go with your first one. It's one of my bad habits, I suppose, at the moment, is when I'm doing little drawings of things, I 9 times out of 10 will go with the first thumbnail. But the thing is, you do more thumbnails, the more you do, the more... Because normally what happens is, the more you do, they get really weird towards the end, because you start having to think outside the box, and it's quite amazing what you come up with, like later on. So it's the same thing here. Start doing all these gestures, you might come up with some crazy one later on, which is the best one ever, and you wouldn't have come up with that because you would have gone with the first one. So she says about just do loads of them. But also, the more you do, and if you keep asking yourself what feels right, you'll end up with a bunch of poses that feel right, and then you can look at all of those. You've got a much better understanding of your character visually, because you'll have all these poses and they'll be telling a story. So I thought it was brilliant. And I love that the character tells you. I really love that. It's like you've got a relationship with this character, like they're alive. And I feel that with my little Sophie. I really do feel like she's alive, which is cool. And I'll put here, be okay with crap poses is part of the process. She says here, this is a trial and error arc. There is a trial and error arc to this process. So don't expect every pose to be perfect. I thought that was nice as well. So in this bit of the article, the final bit, we get 7 poses of the same character, and they're highlighting personality. And I said here, it's like she took a bunch of keywords and turned them into poses. I put starts with writing, or at least understanding your character's story. But then I've also put, but like she said, as you play with your character, the character themselves might show different sides to themselves. So in other words, you might have this story of the character, but as you're playing around with these gestures and stuff, the character might actually come up with its own ideas, and you might think, yeah, I like that. It might actually fit better with the character. So even though this is what I've talked about on other articles, episodes as well. It's like the whole process of drawing, it's not just that you do the writing, it's not that you get the story and that's it, you then do your drawing. What happens is, you do your story, you do your drawing. As you're doing your drawing, you're also getting more of the story. It's this constant back and forth going on between the whole process of drawing. Brilliant, creating characters. Yeah, I put here, look, you're both creating together. And then I put here, so in this bit here, she shows good and bad poses of the same idea, which is brilliant. This was just like last week. Last week we had this thing where she had like gestures, and she'd have one which was really good, and she'd talk about why it's a good pose. She'd have another one where it wasn't so good, and she'd talk about why it wasn't so good. She's doing the same thing here, but there's a difference here. This isn't about the pose. This isn't about whether the pose is good or not. This is about whether the feeling of the pose is right for the character or not. It's cool. But it shows you how, like, there's lots of things going on here. So what I did was I started writing about each of the poses, and then I realised that the best thing to do was actually just to read Ida's little bits about the pose, because she's done it brilliantly. I love this bit, and I've put here. So this is the final bits for this. I like the straights and curves, because what I like about Ida is she's got this constant, balance of straight lines and curved lines. I've noticed that in all of her little poses, you've got this nice balance between straights and curves. I love that. I like the way the character's feet are always at odd angles. So this character is a character sort of that's a bit insecure. That's one of her sort of character traits. And the poses that Ida says are really good, the character's always got these their feet at weird angles, almost at like impossible angles. They're tilted in on themselves. But it's brilliant because it creates this feeling of like awkwardness. So what I love is the character is a little bit awkward. That's part of her personality. So it actually comes off in her feet. Her feet are in awkward poses, which actually is brilliant. It's like the feeling of the character is being shown visually in the body. It's cool, it is. And then I've also put, I like the accessories, the outfit and the poses all tell stories. So the character's outfit, it tells a story, because she's got these little flat shoes on, sort of like little cute little shoes, these big massive glasses, a bit like a geek sort of thing. And then she's also holding like books and stuff, so you get the idea that she's like a bit of a bookworm or something. So you get the accessories and stuff actually tell stories as well. It's not just the pose or the character. I've also put, a good pose isn't just about the technical, it's about the feeling. Yeah, so this bit here, this bit of the article, she's not asking are these poses technically good, she's asking are these poses feeling good. Whereas before, in the one when she was looking at what is gesture, she was actually asking are these poses technically good. So I thought that was quite an interesting distinction thing. And I've also, the final bit I put was little things, like little, oh yeah. So basically one of these poses, the character is very gently tugging on her skirt, but in a very sort of awkward way. You know, like imagine if your skirt was getting blown up by the wind, you sort of like push it down. She's doing that. I can feel what that feels like. I love it. And what I love is that little thing there, it's got so much story in that one little gesture. So again, it shows you how subtle things and little things are powerful. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to work through each of these little poses. We've got seven little poses. So the first one, we've got the character. This character is basically, she looks like a student, a little girl. She's got long hair, big massive glasses, a bit of a geek. She's got it's like a little schoolgirl outfit on, flat shoes, and what else would I say? She's very thin, but she looks really cool. So in the first one, we've got the character is holding a bunch of books in her arm and hunching her back over, and her legs. So we've got a curvy top, and then we've got like a triangular thing for her feet, because her feet are going in on themselves. So this is what she said. She said, this is what Ida said. She said, when looking at this gesture, you can immediately tell what kind of character, what kind of person this character is. She is smart and insecure, but kind-hearted. Curving her back as if she is making herself as small as possible is a great indicator of the insecure aspect. The pose speaks to her character, which makes it a strong pose. It's cool. So basically, because that pose it lines up with her backstory, she says that's a good one. And then I like the fact that she's telling you little things you can do. If you want an insecure character, she's sort of telling you here, you got to make him shorter. So that goes back into what she talked about last week with the stretching and squashing. You want to squash the character. He makes it a little bit insecure. the next one we've got, this character looks a lot more confident, but it still looks a little bit sort of shy, I suppose. But what she's doing, she's got one arm behind her back, the other one going straight down. So again, we've got one side of the character, the hip is pushed out, so we've got like a curvy, and then we've also got like a straight on the other side. So we get this thing of straights and curves again. So in this one she says, when you're making poses for a specific character, you have to keep their personality in mind. The pose may be technically strong, but if it doesn't correspond with their personality, it will render the pose weak, no matter how well it is drawn. This pose is weak because it is generic and does not communicate much about this character, whom I imagine to be very bookish, awkward and shy. I like that, because I like that pose, but like she says, just because it's a nice pose doesn't mean it's right for the character. So the next one, we've got a super confident pose here. The character is pushing their chest up. Yeah, this one is like stretching. So instead of squishing, instead of the character being squished or squashed, she's actually being stretched. So because we know that squashing makes it insecure, we know that this one's, because it's stretching, it's going to be more confident. So we already know this one's not going to be fitting in with the backstory. But I like the pose on this one because she's got her finger up as if like I'm the best. So this is what Ida says. She says, here's another example of a pose that looks good but is a wrong choice for the character's personality. As mentioned earlier, puffing up the chest and spreading the legs is an indicator of outgoing confidence, which directly conflicts with her established personality. Brilliant, isn't it? Oh, the next pose, I love this pose. This is probably one of my favourite poses in this whole article. Yeah, I think it is. So what we've got is the character is wearing she's wearing a little schoolgirl outfit, but it's that pose where I said about it's like the skirt is being blown up by the wind. She's pulling it down. So you've got a little bit of tension going on here with her skirt. But what it does is it creates like a straight line against the curviness. So there's a bit of excitement going on there. And also, for me, that's telling a story. Because it's basically, what I love here is, she's doing the same sort of pose that she did in the previous pose, but instead of it being the confident version, it's fitting in more with the character. So whereas the confident one was being stretched, here again we're seeing squashed. So she's being squashed, but what I love is she's still got stretching going on because of the arm. So you're still getting the stretching going on, even though she's being squashed, which comes in here. It's like this character is sort of trying to be confident or assertive, but her natural trait is to be a bit more shy. So I thought it was brilliant. I love this pose, I do, it's cool. So in the little thing she said, this is what Ida said, this is a better representation of the idea shown before, but with a more appropriate approach for the character's personality. Tugging on her skirt out of shyness while voicing her opinion speaks volumes about who she is as a person and makes this a strong gesture. She is not a person who would have an active silhouette out of will. So that goes into something she talked about last week as well, about the silhouettes. These poses are not just about the poses, they're linked in with the silhouettes as well. It's quite cool, it is. So the next one, another fantastic pose. This article has got some really fantastic poses. Ida Hem is a brilliant artist at capturing energy in her poses. What we've got here is a character sitting on the floor, her legs wide open. Sounds a bit rude, but one of her legs is coming right towards the camera. So you've got like foreshortening going on. But the thing is with that is very well. Before she said this character would not have an active silhouette out of will. This here is creating an active silhouette because everything is all sort of being pushed outwards. So we already know that this one's not going to be be the right sort of pose for this character. So what she's doing is though, she's stretching her head. She's got that feeling as if she's a bit like a bit sort of frustrated, I suppose. As if she, like the anime characters where they sort of thump on the floor. It's like she's doing that sort of pose, and she's scratching her head as well. So this is what Ida says in the thing. She says, "This gesture is another rather weak representation of the character. As mentioned earlier, she would not have an active silhouette, because that would suggest bigger, bolder motions that she would not typically make. As an insecure character, she would make herself as small as possible. This pose is far too open for the kind of person she is." So then what Ida does next is creates the same pose, but fitting in more with the character, which I think is brilliant, because personally, I prefer the pose that isn't the right pose for this character. I think it's way more exciting, but like she says, it doesn't come across in the right way. So what we end up with now is, instead of her legs being wide open and sort of like inviting, everything's much more closed off. So her legs are actually pulled right into her body and creating these triangles. But that's the thing. Whereas before it was very open and like sort of inviting you inwards, this one here is pushing you away. So this is what she says, and this is what Ida says in her little thing. This is a better representation of the same idea shown before. She says, "Notice how instead of spreading her legs across the ground, she pulls them up against her body to appear smaller and possibly to feel more protected. She is not making any grand motions, and she most likely wouldn't if she had a choice." It's cool, it is. I feel a lot more sorry for her in that one. Yeah, it's quite cool how poses have a lot of story in them. It's brilliant. So the last one we're going to look at, she's sitting, the same character, sitting on a little stool. So this one, she's got her feet doing that awkward thing again where they're pushed in on themselves. She's also scrunched up, like she's squashed, making herself small, even though she's still got these nice stretched arms. But the thing is, she's got stretched arms, but her shoulders are pushed right up, almost overlapping her head. So we know this is a good one for this character, because she's squashing herself, and she's also looking a bit awkward. It's cool, it is. So in the little thing, this is what Ida said. "Something I find very helpful while exploring a character's personality is placing them on a stool." So we've got a little art tip here. If you're struggling with your character's poses, stick them on a stool. But it's amazing, isn't it? You could, again, this could be like a little exercise. You could get your same character, and the little drawing exercise is, you've got to have that character sitting on a stool in 20 different poses. How amazing would that be to see how you could sit the same character on a stool in different poses? I think that'd be quite a fun little exercise, that. Because I reckon by the end of it, you'd be doing these crazy things where they like be balancing on one foot or something. She said, what would she look like when she is happy or excited? Her back is still curved, but she's leaning her weight on her knees, which makes the pose look eager and more engaging. That's that thing with the stretched arms. Again, it goes in with the thing of the one before where she was pulling on a little skirt. What we've got the character, her natural trait is making her want to go inwards, but there's parts of her that wants to come outwards. So it's almost like you can see that there's something inside of her bursting to come out, but just the conditioning of life has made her sort of naturally just go inwards. So, but you can see that there's part of her that is confident and wants to come out. I like that. I suppose that's creating a bit of tension, really. Her back is still curved, but she is leaning her weight on her knees, which makes the pose look eager and more engaging. This contributes to making her look happy in a subtle but effective way. How cool is that? And I like the fact she used the word subtle, because that was something I'd noticed throughout this whole article. I think I even said that last week on the podcast. I think I mentioned the word subtle. I think I did. I can't. But that was something that kept popping out to me, was subtle. Like, for instance, where she talks about getting rid of details in the character, it's a subtle shift. It's cool, it is. But that's basically that's it for this article here. After this, the book moves into faces and expressions with the artist Vernon Neyer. That might be a good one to do as well. Maybe I'll do that. If you'd like me to do that, let me know. What it looks like, it's looking into faces and expressions, basic construction. Then we go into exaggerated shapes. Oh, look, I think they're doing the same thing again. Expressions, exaggerated expressions. Yeah, it's very cool, this is. Oh, there's loads of it on this one. And then after that we go into colour theory. It's cool. But basically that's it. I hope you enjoyed this. So like I said, my main takeaways from this article. Last week, my main takeaways from the article were that this is a big one. Yeah, there was a nice setup. So it was a nice balance between theory, examples, and theory and examples. So basically a nice balance between writing and images. Also, I like the fact that the keywords were highlighted. Fun poses and characters. Line of action is the foundation of story. I said how it's nice. It's fun looking at positive and negative versions of poses, because a good way to learn how to do something is how not to do it. Silhouettes. That thing about having string attached to the character, which I thought was cool. And exaggeration. And then this week, the main takeaways were using reference versus imagination. They're the same, but there's different things going on, which I like that. Also, I said what to ask and look for when capturing gestures. I like that. It's like you've got to be mindful and aware of what you're doing throughout the whole process. Balance between rules and imagination. Exaggeration. That word was there last week as well. So I feel like that's a key word for gesture drawing, is exaggeration. But it's about knowing what you should be exaggerating and what not. Also knowing your character. And then we've also got observing the character's weight. Balance, the word balance, that pops up a lot as well. Visual flow. I thought that was a sexy thing to say, visual flow. I love it, I do. Visual flow. That's all to do with the line of action and the shapes and stuff. Less is more. That's something that pops up a lot in these articles as well. How less is more. Because the thing is, you sort of think, oh, I've got to put more and more. But actually less is more. Asking yourself questions as you're bringing characters to life. I love that. Also, the importance of story really came into play this week, I thought, with these characters. So that was the thing. The first bit was all about what gesture drawing is, what you should be doing. This bit here was more about the characters, turning gestures into characters. It's cool. And then I also put the balance of technical and feeling. I loved that the feeling of the character came through in this one. That's the thing, even in the gestures there's feeling going on. Oh, that was a little gentle one. lilDENNiS has said, it's game over, sunshine, and little Kitty has just fallen over again. I don't know what's up with little Kitty today. I think she's drunk. I think she's been drinking. But I hope you enjoyed that. I absolutely loved this article, and what it's done is it's made me really excited for this book. Creating Stylized Characters by 3D Toto Publishing. So I think I'm going to do some more of these. Please let me know in the comments and like stuff if you enjoy these, because I am quite interested. But lilDENNiS, he said it's game over, so all we've got left is this week's little inspirational quote, and it actually goes to the artist Ida Hem, who did this little article. I love this little quote as well. Very simple, but it's very, well, I love it. So this is a little inspirational quote by Ida Hem, and it is, gesture drawing is about emotions and storytelling. I love that, and it made me think, when I heard that, because this is I read this in the article, when I heard that I thought to myself, maybe that's why I love gesture drawing so much. Maybe the reason I love gesture drawing so much, because what happened was, when I started doing gesture drawings in 2014, I think, I fell in love with it instantly. You know when you start doing something and you just sort of, it just like connects with you straight away. It was like that. And I feel like maybe what it is it's because what you're doing is you're capturing the emotions and stories of things. So what I love about this is it means everything has got a story. I've got on my desk here, I've got a water bottle. Even that water bottle has got a story. Because if you think about it, if you took all the water out of this water bottle and then scrunched it up, it would be all twisted and stuff. So all of a sudden, the water bottle would have a different gesture. At the moment, it's very straight and static. But like I said, if you scrunched it up, it would have a strange gesture, and that would tell a story. And there'd be a story. You'd look at the water bottle and think to yourself, I wonder how that water bottle got scrunched up. I love it, I do. I think it's brilliant. So for me, gesture drawing is the best part of drawing. It's the best part. I feel like maybe that's why I stuck with it. Instead of going advancing, I stayed with that. Or maybe it's because I found it easy. I didn't find it easy, but maybe because I've done it so much, I got. Maybe it's like a fear of going forwards or something. I don't know, but I love gesture drawings. So this week's little inspirational quote: gesture drawing is about emotions and storytelling. Ida Hem.